Hey, everybody, welcome back to You Are What You Love. Today, my guest is someone that I have been friends with for a really long time and I think has really amazing thoughts on television, thoughts on being a fan, and thoughts on enjoying yourself. And a lot of that is because she has worked in television herself. She was on The Neighborhood, or not on, I'm going to double back because it implies you were out there shaking
Acting
it
my
with,
butt off.
yeah, I hamming it up.
Yeah.
She worked on The Neighborhood, and she is currently working on a Peacock show that is so secret you won't hear about it for a year called Miss Davis. Please welcome my dear friend, Marissa Ziets.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. So happy to have you.
I'm so happy to be here.
So what are we talking about today? What is the piece of media that changed who you are as a person?
I was like thinking a lot about this, and it's funny because the first instinct I had was not this piece of media,
Mhm.
and it wasn't even media at all. It was Barbie dolls, and I was like, that's not media. We could talk about that another time. But I was like, obviously, the answer to this question is Clue, the movie Clue. That is like my pride and joy, my baby. Someone has gifted me a piece of art from a gallery in the Netherlands or somewhere because they knew how much I loved Clue.
Oh my
It's my
goodness.
favorite movie. It's like that's the thing I'd save in a fire in my apartment. Like that's how much I love that art and how much I love Clue.
When you texted me and said Clue, you actually phrased it as, "Would it be okay if I did Clue?" And I got the text and I was like, "Absolutely, you can do Clue." What a fantastic film that I think, changed a lot of, like, how media is made, how endings are looked at, how like, movies are consumed, and so I am really excited to get into this one with you.
Yeah, it's a very special thing for me. And every time like last year, I showed it to my family who had never seen it, which I'm
Oh
like,
my god.
that's appalling. And my mom actually laughed and she calls a lot of things stupid. And she
Mhm.
didn't call this stupid, which meant a lot.
She's a very harsh judge, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
So, do you remember the first time you saw Clue?
Yes. I can't tell you exactly how old I was, but I was at least younger than 8 because it was in my old house and I was not 8 yet. And I remember, and I must, so my parents must have, like, it was on the television and I didn't know what it was. And it, like, sort of like, and I don't love scary movies, but it sort of like scared me a bit in an exciting way, because there's like murder and everything. But I was like so engaged and enthralled, and I couldn't stop thinking about it at like that age, whatever it was. And I don't think at that time I really like understood what I was watching. So it wasn't until like probably years after that that I was like, I need to revisit that thing that was intriguing to me that I enjoyed for whatever I understood. So I was probably like 7 or something.
Wow.
But then I remember like when I really watched it and like, I mean, whoever hasn't seen it, there were 3 different endings, but in the movie, when you watch it, it shows it sequentially. And when I didn't know that was happening, it was like the most exciting. Wait, that's not the ending? Then a second. Wait, that's not the ending? Like it was so funny and poignant and like political, but like everyone was so on point comedically and it was so fast paced. And it's not even a long movie. It's like less than an hour and a half. And it's everything about it was like pitch perfect to me. And it really hit my joy box, we'll call it, really perfectly.
So, you were 7 and it was probably just on, like, it, came on after something and you happened to be sitting there watching the movie.
Yeah.
Do you remember you couldn't stop thinking about it. Do you remember when you, like, sought out seeing it again, like, how you found it? Because at that time, not to date us, but you would have had to have gone to, like, a Blockbuster
Yeah,
or
like my guess is that I probably was in high school when I was like, remember that thing that I enjoyed that one time? And I did theater in high school, and it feels like such a theatery movie, and it's like so
yeah.
theatrical, and they're all such performers. So I think at that point, that's when I really sought it out because I know by college I was like, Clue's my jam. I love Clue.
Do you remember kind of what was going on in your life when you got so connected to it? Like,
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I think as years have gone on, it's felt more affecting to me as like a person who's like attempting to be a storyteller and really like especially who works in the comedy space for the most part, like there's something about it that like is the fact that it's like a thriller comedy is so or like I don't even know what you would categorize it as because there's
Yeah.
murder, there's a lot of murder and like but it's a comedy and it's based on a freaking board game. Like everything about it is so absurd that I think the absurdity of it is what's drawn me to it. But I will say, like, probably in like 2015 or 2016, I went to this like event. Some like WGA speaker was speaking, and I was like, okay, I'll go to this thing. It was interesting. And it was talking about like psychology in relation to storytelling. And the person speaking was sort of like, what's the thing that, and this is when I say that joy box. She didn't use that phrase joy box, but like she was like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the thing you watch that makes you happy? Like not
Mm,
that you think is good, but that makes you happy. And those are two very different things because like something good, you may be reflecting of like what other people have said, what the critics have said, what society says is good, you know?
yeah.
But like what makes you happy is so specific. It like bubbles you up inside and like gives you that giddy feeling. And the first thing I thought of at that moment was Clue. Like it was so clear as day to me, like that was the one.
I love this idea of, like, kind of splitting between what makes you happy and what's good, and how those 2 things are extremely different. Because we've talked about even just before this, we've talked about the kind of the idea of, of critically acclaimed versus comedy, like, what makes you laugh, and how do you define that in the kind of changing structure? And I think it's interesting that Clue, which is so specific in its own genre, but is very much, like, over the top theatrical humor, is this thing that connects to you so much when you've then moved into sitcoms quite a bit. You've worked on some really great sitcoms that have really great comedy. The Neighborhood is so funny, and it's such a sitcom.
Mhm.
Do you feel like that kind of early split of understanding, "I enjoy this and it makes me happy," is most important versus, "This is critically acclaimed and I can," people like your mom isn't gonna call it stupid
Yeah.
or something like that, you know?
That's an interesting question. It's and I also and I actually thought about this before in terms of, it came out in the 80s and
Mhm.
I've never really looked up how was this received at the time, but like I don't actually think it was this critically acclaimed darling at its
Right.
heyday. I all I know is that when it was released in theaters, it showed three different endings and you didn't know what you were going to get when you went into theater, which I think is like spectacular. And in the world of like I know like when we studied stuff in college for TV and media, like studying transmedia, studying choose your own adventure things. It was like so ahead of its time in that like
Yeah.
originality of like who would have thought to do something so unique and spectacular? And you look at like Knives Out and other things like that these days that are clearly so heavily inspired by a movie like Clue that it's like I can't help but reflect on those elements. I think because it like there's something about the fact that it's an older movie, right? Like there's something about
Mm,
that the nostalgia factor. And I wasn't alive when it came out. I would have loved to see it in theaters, but
yeah.
the fact that it's not like talked about, it's not a popular movie, and there's something I won't even say like sort of special about it, but there's something about that it like removes all pretense or removes all like gloss. Like I can just enjoy it and not have to worry what anyone's thinking about it. I don't have to worry about how it's received. And maybe that helps. I don't know. But I think
Yeah.
I'm not I know like I know I love it. And I've talked to a lot of other people and like I have an old coworker who also is obsessed with it and his friend is writing the remake, which obviously
Oh
I'm
my god.
very nervous about.
Nervous, yeah.
Um but it's not going to be anything. It's not going to be the same plot as the original, which will be
Okay.
interesting. It's been fun, like talking to other people who also love Clue as much as I do. It's such a specific thing, but I don't think even if no one else liked it, I think it's like, I think it's so special. And I think the theater girl in me responds so heavily to the theatricality of it. And they're all so over the top. And like, I don't even care about the board game. Like, the board game's great, but like, it's just the fact that I think it's every piece of it. It's the endings, it's the characters, it's the actors, it's the fast pacedness, it's the music, it's the way Tim Curry runs through like every Mr. Green line when every literal thing that happens gives me such joy bubbles. Like I just can't. It makes me happy every time I think about it. I watch it probably once a year just for
Mm,
my own enjoyment. And you'd think it's like after so long, you'd get sick of it. Never. I'll never get sick of it.
never. Yeah, no, I think it really is. I love this idea of, like, a joy box because to me, that movie feels like someone did put, like, box joy, which
Yeah.
feels so, not exactly what you're saying, but just, like, so impossible, I think. And I know the remake, I hope your friend's friend is doing a good job
Yeah.
because when they announced it, I was like, "Ooh, are we sure?" Like, I
I
was like,
agree.
I'm nervous because I you referenced Knives Out, and, like, I love Knives Out, but I don't think Knives Out is Clue. I think it's missing some of that campiness that people feel afraid to do now, or it just isn't in style and was in style in the '80s and should stay in style, in my opinion. I love a campy movie.
Yeah, campy, it's also so hard to qualify what is campy, and so it's, like, hard because it's, like, how do you even, like, manifest that to the level I feel like the remake will not be campy, although I've heard this guy is obsessed with Clue, so I hope he is aware of the justice he needs to do for all of us. So,
I those are some of those jobs certain jobs are just like, there's no winning, and
yeah.
of course, you would take it, but, like, who
Yeah.
wouldn't? But, it's one of those things where you're like, "But do you have to put my name on it?" Like, could you just
Yeah.
tell people
Exactly.
there's no winning, there's no way to do it and be like, "Well" because even if you write a perfect film, you go, "Well, Tim Curry's not in it."
Right,
So
and no one is Tim Curry, like, as much as I've made a lot of lists of who I think should be, I've made many lists of who I think could be, like, and I'm like, Christoph Waltz would be great, but he's still not Tim Curry, you
yeah,
know? No one
it's
is.
a different plot sounds like the right move, though, because I can't imagine trying to remake well, first of all, the plot is I guess you're right, I guess not everyone has seen Clue, but it feels so iconic to me that, like, I can't imagine watching a remake of that movie knowing what happens.
And I think and I don't know if you feel this way, but, like, when I especially when I was watching with my parents, but, like, rewatching it as you get older, like, when you're younger, it's just fun, it's light, it's funny,
Yeah.
and every time I watch it, I pick up a new funny thing that's happened, and which is
Mhm.
lovely, but as I've gotten older, the political stuff, like, there is a huge plot, like, the whole plot is around politics in Washington, DC that is happening. It's set in the past. It's set in, like, I think, like, this 50s or 60s, I honestly don't know, but it was made in the '80s. And there's so many elements of like why things happen because of the politics of society at the time of the story. But it's like you
Mhm.
can't pick up on that when you're 7, when you're 14. Like, you have to be like, you're like, oh my God, how poignant. Not only is this fun and frolicky and like light, but it's
Yeah.
it's pointing out crazy nonsense of politics, which is
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, I think it's such a layered film, like, you're right, where especially because you can go and just enjoy it so young and have no idea what's
Mhm.
going on, you're just like, "Oh, silly people are
Yeah,
running around and being silly, and I
yeah,
like that dress, and this is
yeah,
spooky," like,
yes.
everything about it's just fun, but then I do think sometimes stuff that has that level of camp is the type of media that can get away with those big conversations because you can be 7 and not get what's going on, but you can also be a teenager or be an adult and be like, "Oh, they're talking about politics," like,
Yeah.
and nobody has to be uncomfortable about it.
It's just it's escapism at its finest, even with addressing realistic elements of life, which is interesting.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's a sitcom is maybe the closest to being able to do that?
I think a good sitcom can. These mockumentary style sitcoms, I think, probably think that they're doing it more because the mockumentary
Mm.
elements of being able to address the audience and say, here's what I'm thinking about the thing that you just saw, which is like, as my old boss would say, a cheat. Which like is fine. And like I love mockumentary style shows, but like the fact that the character can tell you exactly what they're thinking without you having to infer it, I think
Yeah.
it's interesting, but I think, yeah, good sitcoms have the capacity to like address real life things without being too heavy handed. So, yeah, I think a sitcom, even more so than a dark comedy or whatever, is the simplest form of that
I
similarity.
think Clue fits into this weird genre of things that were like now we have a lot of IP built on IP, right? Like we're
Mhm.
remaking all of these different movies. We're kind of coming back like Ocean's 11 is building a whole new franchise out of characters that never existed before. And there's so many things you could say about all of those. But with Clue, it fits into this old version of coming up with IP, which is like Pirates of the Caribbean came off of a theme park ride. The Haunted Mansion came
Yeah.
off of a theme park ride. Clue was a board game. Um, and I'm so interested in, like, that idea of pulling a story out of maybe 5 minutes worth of like, I
Yeah.
don't even know how long the Pirates of the Caribbean ride is, but there's 5 or 6 movies that have come out, off of a ride that's a boat ride.
Yeah.
Um, like, it's like if someone tomorrow was like I mean, I think Monopoly, for example, is different. You play that for hours and get into massive fights.
They made Battleship the movie.
Right. And it's so I'm curious how you feel about that type of kind of story building. How do
Mhm.
you build 'cause I feel there are game mechanics in Clue of here's a different possible ending, here's that, based off of choices.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, I think that's why I assume it came from the writer, the originality of choose your own adventure sort of, and not that the audience would choose, like when you
Right.
were getting your ticket at the time, you didn't know, first of all, people didn't know there was going to be different endings, but you
Yeah.
didn't know which ending you were going to get. And frankly, like I love watching it now where you get to see all three, because I do personally believe the last one's the one.
Yeah.
But it's so fun when they're like, if no, maybe that didn't happen, this happened. And there's something about, again, like I just think about all the stuff I've learned about media and transmedia and like all these things that it's like, how could they have known at that time how imaginative that was? But I think that imaginative nature can only come from the fact that it was based on a game, right? Like, I don't actually think it's like Knives Out didn't do that because they would have been like, it was too much like Clue. Like, I think
Yeah.
if Clue hadn't been based on, like, there are those 6 characters. There's no Wadsworth or whatever in the
In
game,
the game, yeah.
but those characters don't have these defined personalities in the game, and it's interesting. It's like he's I assume it's a man who wrote it. Maybe not, but let's assume a man wrote this, and he's looking at the images of these characters and probably like, what can I come up with? And that's such a fun idea to me to be like, here's like, imagine if Guess Who, the game, which I loved growing up, was like, I
Yeah.
don't know what movie would come from that, but the idea of looking at those little pictures that you described to the other person and making a full fleshed out character based on that face. Like, what a fun idea. But I think you almost, for this movie, you needed that imagination and that baseline of the game to be able to think, who are these characters? I mean, Miss Scarlet is like the ingenue, right? And like, that may have only happened because of seeing the image of Miss Scarlet in the game.
Right.
And
In the
but
game.
then the
Yeah.
idea of like, I just believe that like this person wouldn't have thought of choose your own adventure if the game wasn't literally random each time.
Yeah, because it is like the Clue board game itself, which I've only played because I love the movie so much.
Yeah.
You pick up the cards. I'm like gesturing for people who can't see. It's an audio medium. Um, you have to put sort of the 3 cards in the envelope that say this is how it happened, and then you have to sort of solve the mystery. And in doing that, it is very fun because the answer's on the board the whole time, which is kind of how I feel about the movie too. Like,
Mhm.
they tell you, and there's 3 different possibles, and obviously you go through the 3 different endings, but if you watch that movie again, you're like, "Oh, man, of course," like, which is the best way to do a murder mystery,
Y y
but there's also that level of the whole like, the actual game. I have to imagine you were sitting there looking at, like, how do I come up with okay, obviously, it's a murder mystery, it takes place in this house, here are the different like, it's sort of they gave you the set and said, "Figure it out from there," um,
Yeah, I
which
mean,
is such a
I
creative feat.
there's something I love so much about, like, I love the bottle episode of television, and if people don't know it, I
Mm,
assume people know what that is, but if that's not clear, it's like everything takes place in one setting. Like in that Friends
yeah.
episode where it's like everyone's late to Ross's dinner and like everyone's getting ready. Like no, it all takes place in that apartment. Like I love a bottle episode. I love a one setting situation. Like Knives Out even wasn't really one setting because they get in cars. And yes, there's a car in the
Mm.
beginning of this, but like the entire thing takes place in this house. And like I love murder mysteries. I love things that take place in houses. I would love, like, I've literally gone in Boston to a place in the random city outside of Boston to go do a theater murder mystery dinner, which was one of the most fun
Ooh,
experiences of my entire life. And I highly recommend it. But I love a murder mystery, love it all taking place in one spot. And it's like to have that, like, and there's something about the idea, and Clue does it so well, where like you said, like when you're like, oh, of course, like that you can go back and rewatch it now knowing the pieces.
Yeah.
Like that feels like a really good murder mystery is you didn't know exactly what was going to happen. You get surprised and you can rewatch it with that knowledge now and still enjoy it.
Are there movies that you think wouldn't exist or wouldn't exist in the same way if Clue hadn't happened?
I mean, I have to yeah, of course. I mean, again, I think that genre in it's just like there's so many murder mysteries that are like serious, right? Like and
Yeah.
that like probably even Ocean's 11. Like that's
Mhm.
campy in its own right. Like any of those maybe not murder mysteries, but like just like movies where there's murder or action or like sort of like gotcha moments. I feel like Clue had such a heavy hand in that style. Like, how could it not? I think it. I don't know if before then there were funny murder mysteries,
Mm.
but to me, it's a funny murder mystery, and it's such a specific thing. And again, like Knives Out to me, 100% would not exist without Clue.
Yeah.
And I think that was really critically acclaimed for like that kind of movie. I think Game Night, which I love and think is great. I think Game Night would not exist without Clue because
Oh,
I think
yeah.
you need those and that these are more modern obviously like examples, but I think the originality and the imagination of like a story that's funny and action packed and like you're along for the ride of things happening and spiraling to me, how could Clue not have had such an influence on those things?
Do you feel like it's I feel I guess I kind of assumed everyone has seen Clue until you've mentioned how many people haven't, because it feels like such a classic film to
The
me. It
touchstone
feels
of this yeah, you'd think.
yeah, it's a huge thing, but I guess I wonder when you went because you went to film school, we went to the same film school, that's how we know each other.
Mhm.
Um, when you went to film school, did you find that you expected people to have seen this movie and no one had, or does it feel like a cult classic to you?
It definitely I think it definitely feels like a cult classic to me. It's when I tell people it's my favorite movie, they, like, give me this look of, like, "Really?" Like, they're surprised and judgmental, like, they think I'm too young to, like, love that movie, or and
Mm,
I think they think it's like saying some I don't even know, but I've gotten a lot of judgmental eyes, but then I meet someone who's like, "Oh my god, I love Clue too." And you feel like, "Yes, I get you, you get me. We're on the same page." But I will say like some of my other favorite movies are like Galaxy Quest is like number 2 for me. And it
yeah.
feels like just as campy. I love Stepford Wives. Feels just as like I love that those style movies that are like, "What is this? What am I watching right now?" in the most fun way. And I actually don't think Stepford Wives, and I forget if it was a remake, but like the Stepford Wives that came out with Nicole Kidman, that also feels campy and funny. And I actually don't think that would exist without Clue because I think
Mm,
all these campy, funny, serious but not sincere, like or sincere but not serious movies. I think
mhm.
that is such a baseline for that style.
I think that's such a interesting thing for people to be shocked by. I or to say kind of like an ew, like Clue? Clue's your favorite movie? I don't know, like, I guess when you said Clue, I was like, "Yeah, of course, it's such a great movie that everyone respects." Like
And I don't know that I think a lot of people haven't seen it. Like, I've met so many people
Yeah.
who are like, "Oh, I've never seen that." Like, it just passed by. I think a lot of people in our age group have never because it was an '80s movie, if you're not, like, into that style, like, there are people I will not show it to because I'm like, "You will not
Mm.
enjoy this. I can't sit idly by and allow you to desecrate my joy. It is not gonna work for me."
Do you I love that inclination because I have the same one with Ocean's 11, actually, it's that I would argue is one of my top 5 films, and I recently had that experience where I was like I found out someone had never seen it, which was shocking. Obviously, I'm talking about the remake, not the Frank
Yes.
Sinatra classic. I say obviously, like, of course, obviously, but I
I
am. I'm talking
assumed.
about
Yes.
but recently I was like, "Oh, you haven't seen it? We should watch it." And the person that I was talking to sort of was like, "I really don't think I'm gonna like it." And I immediately was like, "Well, then we should not watch it together because."
Yeah, you don't wanna ruin a friendship over something like that, and it's like not that it's not important because it's so important that you're like, "I can't ruin our friendship because these 2 things mean so much to me."
So, when you do have that, like, kind of connection with someone and you get to the point where you're like, "I wanna share this movie with you that means so much to me," does that feel like a level of almost incompatibility to some degree?
Mm.
Like, if you tell someone your favorite movie is Clue, you wanna show it to them, and they sort of were like, "Oh, this is so dumb." How do you move forward?
Ooh. It's funny, I actually don't think I've been in a situation where I've been like, "I wanna show you Clue," except for with my family last year when my family's very difficult to pick a movie to watch together, and I was like, "We're just gonna watch Clue. This is too much work. You've either seen it and don't remember it," and they enjoyed it, and so I was like, "Okay, solid." I think Clue is so special to me that, like, it would take a lot for me to sit with a new person to watch it. Like, it's interesting. Someone I know recently was watching Stepford Wives for the first time because they had never seen it and they were like thinking something they were writing would have
Mhm.
some, basis in a similarity. And I was like, oh my God, this movie is like, again, one of my top 10 movies. And I was like, I'm going to rewatch it. And I laughed so hard and it's so poignant and I think it's so clever. And I was like, what did you think? And she was like, I thought it was good. And I was like, oh, okay. Like
Yeah.
there's like, I'm not going to hold it against her. And Stepford Wives isn't Clue, but I'm like, okay, this is a good lesson to remind myself that like not everyone has the same joy
Yeah.
box as you. We'll call it again. Like I just am like, okay, I need to temper my expectations for what other people will enjoy. But I've really enjoyed when I meet someone who also loves Clue. That to me is like a treat. And because then I know like we have this thing we could talk about again, like the friend who was like on vacation at this like she went to some exhibit at this art museum. It was either the Netherlands or like Denmark or Amsterdam or somewhere. And it was like a Clue like what are they called? Like exhibit, but a Clue like expedition. I don't know what it's called. And so she literally was like, I know how much you love Clue and bought me this piece of art. And if I had it with me, I would show you. But it's like, it's a box of like 9 squares and it's like pop colors, which I love. And it's like drawn versions of each character, like making funny faces in this like pop art style thing. And it even has like Yvette as one, and it's like the perfect it was like it's the best gift I've ever received, ever in my entire life, because it meant so much to me. Because she's like, we connect on this thing. I know how much you love this, and it meant so much for me to get it for you. And I was like, wow, what a nice like. And it's so bizarre, but it's like whenever I look at it, it makes me really happy. Like it just again brings me this level of joy and like bubbliness that like when I'm smiling so much, like I just love like I could talk about Clue for hours because it's just so special. So it would be very hard to go back to the question of like to bring someone into that fold because I would be very nervous. Like, what if they don't like it?
Yeah, so it seems like it's for you, it's more of a, like, sort of secret path to instant connection versus something that you're
Mm.
willing to share with someone because it could ruin your connection.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, I think it's exactly that. Like, I think when I find someone who also loves it, that's what's special. Like, I don't need to bring someone new in. If I connect with someone about it, that's a special
Yeah.
moment.
Oh, I actually like that a lot better because I think it's almost like a kind of secret handshake, sort of, "So, like, what's
Yeah,
your
it's like a
favorite
club
movie?"
we're both in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
I
I love
I
that.
really love that. I think it's a very positive spin because I think we've talked a lot on other episodes of this show about how it can be nerve-wracking or very distressing when people sort of roll their eyes at the thing that feels like it builds up a part of who you are, and I love the sort of positive spin of, like, maybe I'll just look for people who already like it.
Yeah. Yeah, like, if someone's like, "What's your favorite movie?" and I say that, and someone's like, "Ah," and I'm like, "You got
Yeah.
it." Like, I made a
Yeah.
face for people listening. I made a shocked smile joy face, and that's when I know I've got them.
Um, when you kind of when you do find someone who does love Clue, what do you know about that person instantly?
They have good taste. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because in my last job, I had the coworker who, uh he loves Clue so much, and he's the one whose friend is writing the thing, and, like so it was fun because, like, he would, like, tell me things, like, that his friend was, like, doing and how exciting it was, and we would just talk about it, and we would like, again, with my lists of who would play parts, like, we would get to talk about that, and I always thought he had good taste and is a funny person, but it's such a specific sense of humor, I think. Like, there will be people who don't like Clue. It
Yeah.
is, like, you have to really like the campiness to get on board, and I think there are a lot of people who just won't, and I think it made it clear to me that he has the same sense of joy in that specific type of comedy, and likes. I know he likes murder mysteries, so I think it's like some people are like murder mysteries that aren't campy, and I think it's such a niche style that I think it just showed me his style of comedy.
When you find out that someone doesn't like Clue or sort of rolls an eye at you, do you feel like that means they won't understand your sense of humor in general, or that they just maybe don't have the same
Mm.
kind of enjoyment of camp that you do?
I think the latter. I think I get enjoyment out of a lot of things. I laugh at a lot of things. I like a lot of different things, which I think is helpful for me to connect with people, especially about like media. Um, so I don't really like think it I think for me it's like, okay, we won't connect over this. They just have a different sense of what they like. And I bet I can have in my like Rolodex of enjoyment, I bet there's something that we can connect on in that sense. And
Yeah.
that does typically work.
I kinda like that as a sort of just directly connecting over because you watch a lot of TV. I think you said current count is 100 and how many shows this year?
Yeah. So far, like this year, because I've been keeping track now, I've watched like 138 different pieces of content that have come out in this cap. Maybe I've watched some older things too. So maybe we'll say 134 different pieces of television that have come out. I'm not even counting books and movies,
That
but
is
like,
that's
yeah,
wild to me. Um,
it's silly.
but it's great though. I think, there's something really cool about this idea that, like, "Well, you didn't like that one, there must be another one that I liked that you'll like too."
Yeah, I really love almost every genre. Like I will even watch like horror TV shows. I don't like horror movies, but for some reason like a horror show feels different. But I watch pretty much every genre of television, so it'd be hard for me to not find some like common
Yeah.
ground with someone.
What do you think makes television specifically, like, a great way to connect with someone versus, just a general, like, connecting with someone over a different type of interest, like food or sports or what about TV is this sort of instant connection for you?
I think there is some level of like the storytelling people like
Mm,
and just the style of story. It like definitely clues me into what people like enjoy.
yeah,
I think like when someone's like, "Oh, I really liked Game of Thrones." Like you're like, "Okay, you really like fantasy, high impact, like actiony, all-encompassing storytelling." And that's great. And like that helps me to understand that person more. And I think like television is such a way to connect with people because you're if you like the show, you like the
mhm,
characters, right? Like fundamentally, television, it's not necessarily the story, it's the
right,
characters and the characters are always unique to what's happening and I think I enjoy finding out like what people connect best with in a show because I love recommending shows to people but I will only do that based on what the information I have about what they're watching
yeah,
what they're already watching because it's like I find it very difficult when someone's like oh my god I love this thing you should watch it too it's like no just because I love it doesn't mean you'll like it unless I know you really like this type of thing. And I think for me, it just helps me like television. Like I was reading this article last week that was talking about how like reading books
mhm,
makes us more human. And like especially reading fiction, it like fiction helps us, you know, empathize more with people because you may be reading a different perspective than you're used to. And I think television to me is such a way to open people's eyes and hearts essentially to different points of view like and the people that I seem to talk to are all open people and want to learn different things and I think fundamentally as cliche as this is television truly like allows you to see things from other
yeah.
perspectives and I think that's the loveliest part of storytelling is like being able to get outside of yourself and see what others would think.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point and a really beautiful point because I think kind of working in the industry as we have, I know I've kind of had friends who have said, "Oh, I have to go do something instead, like leave the industry and do something that makes a difference in people's lives." And really love the idea that you've sort of articulated here, which is that television can be that. You can you can help someone see something that they didn't necessarily see before. Um, and I think there's a really strong kind of point of that of which is that, making media and the media that we consume really does affect your point of view and what you believe in and how you see other people.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Do you feel like do you I mean, I don't know that there's this in Clue specifically, but do you think that there's like a moment in TV that you can say this specifically either changed my mind or changed someone else's mind about something?
I mean, the thing that I can't it's not really a changing minds, but, like, for example, my parents live in suburban New Jersey, and they're not exposed to a lot of difference. We're Jewish, and our community's very Jewish. So the people that they associate with are just, like, white Jewish people. And so they just don't know different types of people, and everyone's probably, like, straight and cisgendered, so they're really not used to difference, right, in any capacity. And they watch the show Billions. And I don't know if you know the show Billions, but like a main character on the show is non binary. And it's really the first foray into a non cisgendered person that my parents have experienced in like
Mm,
media, in life, in whatever you want to call that. And it's helpful for them to see them in a show business context. Like their identity doesn't have to do, it influences their character choices, but like it doesn't define them as a business person. And I think in that context, it's like how great that a show that is clearly for like white men. I mean, I watch
yeah.
Billions and enjoy it, but like Billions is about finance in like New York and Connecticut. Like they're all
Yeah,
white
yeah.
men. And it's like that's the majority of people watching the show. And what a great way to put someone in there who's a fantastic actor and
Mhm.
has an interesting story, but like their non-binary identity does not define their character. It is a piece of their character. And for like my parents to have that as an understanding of
Yeah.
different types of people, like that is the first example I could think of like, that's really interesting and unique to me that like we need more of this. And like, on reality, I don't watch much reality TV, but like a few years ago on Big Brother, there was a trans person. And like, I was like, this is going to be the first person a lot of fans of Big Brother see as a human being in front of them. And I think television has the capacity to put stories forward and include characters in contexts that you wouldn't naturally see them, like a non binary person in the white man finance space. I think there's something really fantastic about inclusion in that way because you are giving people the opportunity to learn something new without feeling like it's a lesson learned.
Mm. Where it's just yeah, it's just these are characters that exist in the world, and it's representative because that's what the world exists. It's not, like, people rag on Friends a lot for this, which is that it's not representative of New York because
Yeah.
it's a group of white people. So, I mean, a group of white friends, they don't seem to ever interact with the rest of New
Yeah.
York.
Yeah. It's bizarre.
Um, yeah, but so I think kind of something that you've touched on is this idea that, yeah, if you make media simply representative of the actuality of humanity, then everyone is being portrayed as a human character, which then makes people realize, oh, my bubble is not the only thing that exists.
I think that's exactly it. It's my bubble is not that all that exists. It's that we live in a very like I mean, in the past it was a very enclave based society, and I think to a
Mm,
degree we do still live that way. Like not necessarily in cities as much, but in a lot of like the middle of this country and suburbs and like more suburban and rural areas, it's like it's very enclave focused, and
yeah.
you're really in your bubbles. And to me, the main way of exposure is media, is
Yeah.
entertainment, especially television, because it's it, good television is not trying to force something down your throat. Good television is good characters who have something to say. And I think in Billions, for example, it's a well done show and allowing someone to just be a person in society who works and lives and is fully fleshed out only enhances someone like, and my parents aren't like, they're very accepting. They just don't live in a world where that's in front of them. But I think
Right.
it's opened their eyes and minds to something that they would have never known.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really, really cool example of that too, because it's not necessarily like this big, you didn't have to sit them down and have them watch something that is specifically that. It's actually there's something powerful about it being sort of on their home turf, right? Like they're watching a show that was made for them, and
Yeah.
this person also is supposed to be part of that narrative and becomes I think there's value on both sides of media, of course. but there's something nice about it. It's sort of changing minds without realizing that their minds were being changed,
Yeah.
um, to some degree.
Yeah, it's cool that TV I think it's cool that TV has the capacity to do that, more so than a lot of other things.
Yeah. I also wonder how you feel about it being like a TV specifically. You live with those characters for so much longer than you would with a movie. And so it can be sort of, do you feel like it can be sort of gradual and that's part of what can make your mind change so much, where it is in a movie you have 2.5 hours and a certain number of characters and maybe less than that, maybe more than that, but it's a sit down view and depart experience. Whereas TV, it's something you're tuning into every week. I think Billions has been on for, like, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I definitely feel that way. I think, but I also think with television, it is more character driven. There's
Mm,
obviously story driven plot points, but I think movies are plot driven, right? Like that's
yeah,
sort of the point. And I think the whole way to connect to people is for the character driven nature of television. And I do think living with characters is what makes them interesting because you're like, I can't wait to see what this person does next. Like there are shows that I've watched where I'm like, I could literally watch this every week of my life and never get bored. And
yeah,
I mean, again, I've watched 18 years of Grey's Anatomy and I'm still thrilled and excited every episode because I love these people so much. I'm like, I need a full year's warning before the show ends because I'm not going to do well. And I
yeah,
care so much about these characters. And I think people really get connected to these characters and that is what is beneficial of television. You are connecting to people that may be different from you and I think that's lovely and unique and I just don't know in what other capacity that exists.
yeah. I know for you personally, I'm curious for you, I think also, like, we think about these bigger pieces of diversity when we talk about representation in media, but in Turning Red recently, they just showed a character in middle school that has it's an insulin
It's a continuing glucose monitor. I have actually a lot to say about this, but I'll
yeah,
keep it brief. It's interesting. Like, yeah, so I'm a type 1 diabetic, and obviously it's like that is so underrepresented in media. And basically, like, there's these things that I'll call quote unquote diabetes jokes, which I find very unfunny and they're geared at type 2 diabetics and people don't even know the difference between type 1 and type 2. So it's
mhm,
really hard just like in especially like in comedies people make diabetes jokes all the time and it's so offensive and they're not funny and that's just my own opinion. But in Turning
yeah,
Red, they had these two tertiary characters that had these things called continuing glucose monitors. The interesting piece of this is that I was like so excited when I saw the trailer and I was like, "Oh my god, how fun because you're going to be a child who watches this movie and you're like, they're like me because type 1 diabetics, a lot of them are children.
right.
And I learned that someone who works in some like special effects or some part of Pixar, I think it was on the movie, has type 1 and was like, you should include this. Great. I go and watch the movie. It takes place in, I think, 2004 or 2002.
Mhm.
Continuing glucose monitors did not exist then.
Oh,
And so
no!
my issue then was like, "Ugh, I want to just enjoy this. They could have just had the children have insulin pumps, which did
Yeah.
exist then. But I was like, no one took the time to spend 1 minute like Googling
Oh,
when did these
no.
come to be. So they were not, it wasn't actually accurate.
Yeah.
So, but yes, it's like obviously, I mean, I have a lot of opinions of representation in entertainment. You know, like I was watching this show with my parents and there's a character who's in a wheelchair
Mhm.
and I've seen the actor before. He's not in a wheelchair. And I was like, why could you not have cast a character or an actor who is in a wheelchair? Is that not?
Mm,
I bet they're just as good and there are
yeah.
plenty. And I think it's tough to, you know, that is a big thing for me of like, you know, between disabilities, both seen and unseen,
Mhm.
body diversity. Like there's a lot of different types of things that I would love to see more of in media that I don't see. And you know, we've seen change. Like we talk about Clue, and I love Clue, but clearly it's a very white movie. And I
Sure.
bet when they make a remake, it probably will not be, which is good. Move forward.
Right.
Friends did not have any diversity. You know, like I like to believe that things are changing and progressing forward. It's all very slow, um, slower than I'm very impatient.
You're like, "I'm ready now." Yeah, but I do think it's cool that I am now I'm bummed. I was like, "Oh, how cool," like, kids got to see, a
I
continue
bet the children don't think about when was this made? When was this supposed to be? They're probably just thrilled to see something like themselves. But then you're like, why couldn't one of the four friends have it? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But, and that's the thing that I struggle with, where I'm like, it's never like they're showing one thing, but it's never enough. Right.
Yeah.
But that's where our minds go.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because it's sort of like we were talking about with the clue script. It doesn't matter what you do, it's not gonna be exactly right.
No, of
Um,
course.
but there's something about striving for that, I think, which is pretty cool because it is in things like something like Turning Red. No one's going to go think about sort of representation or things that are happening or people that aren't like them or these different things. Um, and I think when you can do that in media like that, it is pretty cool. It is like a I don't know, I think perhaps this one person who was like, "I'm leaving media to do something that matters," has really struck a chord with me because
Well, I talked with someone who actually we went to college with. Her father works in special effects, and so she grew up in LA in entertainment. She actually went to college to do, I think she was the one major that's in medical stuff. Basically, she went to go be a social worker. And so she went to
Oh,
grad
okay.
school to be a social worker, which I was like, wow, that's so amazing. Like, you're genuinely helping people. Like, I feel weird because it's like, you're doing this thing. And she's like, that's so untrue. Because think about all the doctors who are performing surgeries, who are doing all these things. Think about me having to like go through this. Like, social work is really difficult. At the end of the day, all you want to do is go home and watch television. And
Mm,
you are helping clear minds. You are helping people by allowing them to do well in their jobs, to save lives, by providing them that escape.
yeah.
I was like, okay, that's a lovely way to look at this.
You're like, "I've changed lives myself. I
Yeah.
also am saving lives."
Yes, exactly. My hands touch those lives.
It's just as important.
Exactly.
I one thing I do wanna get into that we've touched on a little bit, but I think is sort of kind of the thesis statement of this show to some degree, is this idea that you brought up, the split between something that's good and something that I enjoy. Um, and I'm curious, as someone who works in television, who's worked in different types of television, you're working on sort of like prestige TV now, you've worked on sitcoms, you've been all kind of across the board, how you feel about that split and where sort of the value is put on each one.
Yeah, it's really tough because again, I'm a person who watches a lot of content and enjoys a lot of different types of things, and I've really encountered a lot of people, especially these days, with I think there were 525 original scripted English shows last year, which is an
Oh my
insane amount
goodness.
of shows that knowing like I'm, above 150 and I'm not even cutting half, right?
Yeah.
And that's an insane amount of shows to produce, to watch, to make, but a lot of them these days are just I think there's this caliber of like streaming is prestige, is shiny, is new, is exciting. And people talk about these things like they're better. And I think
Mm,
that concept of like quote unquote better is what I find tough because it's like, why is it better to watch a show on Apple TV than it is to watch a show on CBS? Like, what does that
right.
mean? Because taste is so unique. And why should people be shamed for that? I watch a bajillion Hallmark movies. I love Hallmark movies. They're so absurd and but I enjoy myself every time I watch them. They're fun, they're light, they're goofy. You know exactly what's going to happen. But like, I really genuinely dislike the term guilty pleasure. I find
Mm,
you're basically telling people they should feel guilty about this thing that they're consuming. Why should anyone feel guilty about what they enjoy? And that's what it feels like. That's where that difference comes in because that's implying that what they're enjoying is not good. And like deeming something bad because it's not critically praised or acclaimed. It's like, who are these critics to decide what I can enjoy? Like, I love 911 and 911 Lone Star, and they're not like the highest quality prestige show, but I'm having a blast. Like,
yeah.
if I'm watching a network television drama, I want to be having a blast. And a lot of times I am. And it's like, if that's not good for someone else, okay, but I don't know who's deciding that measure. And it's tough because it's like we're in this time where, the internet is dictating a lot of things. And I get I get a lot of frustration, and it's tough because then I feel bogged down by what people are saying. And I enjoy Hacks, and I've enjoyed both
Mhm.
seasons of Hacks, for example. But the world is like, this is the best show. It's so original, so unique. And it's like, yes, it's good, but like, it's not necessarily better than a sitcom on Fox. Like, I
Right.
enjoy sitcoms on Fox just as much as I enjoy Hacks. It may be different level of like tone and more expensive and whatever, but like that my joy from one should not be taken away because it's of lesser status of
Yeah.
something. And I think that's a big that's what I look at these days of like because we're so bogged down with television, there's so much television. It's like who's to say what's good versus what's bad? And I think that concept of guilty pleasures is like, who's dictating that? Who's
Yeah.
dictating what to be guilty for? And why should I let someone else tell me what I can outwardly say I enjoy? And I can sit there and say, like, I watch a lot of TV that I don't think is good. I'm curious about it. Like, I just finished a show that I would tell people not to watch because I was like, do not watch this. I did not enjoy it. I don't think it's enjoyable for anyone. It was a big
Mhm.
downer. And like last year, I watched a show that I was like, this is the worst show I've ever seen. I won't say these names on the show because I don't want to like inform someone's opinion. But like, frankly,
Yeah.
I'm like, sometimes I watch things and I'm like, okay, now I can know that I did not enjoy this. But I wouldn't like, I, I maybe someone would. I'd be shocked.
Yeah.
But like, who am I to like? I wouldn't tell someone, oh, like you should feel guilty if you like, who am I to?
Yeah.
I don't think it, and it's like I feel like, and living in LA makes it difficult because everyone has such opinions of like television, and when you're like, oh, I like this network show, people really judge you for enjoying
Yeah.
network television, and but yet, like, and I love Abbott Elementary, but the world is like, this is the best sitcom to exist in a long time, and it's like, it's great. I will not take away any of its credit. It is fantastic. It's original. I love it. It's set in Philadelphia, so like I feel close to all the specific comments.
Mhm.
But I will say, like, Welcome to Flash is just as funny and interesting and good, and like it's not talked about. I think Grand Crew is just as funny and interesting and good and not talked about. Like there are a bunch of shows on network television that are just as funny and good, but they just
Yeah.
are not getting the same, I don't know what, the same acclaim, the same reception that one show is. And it's like I don't think it's fair to categorize these shows as good and not good. I think
Mm.
everyone should be allowed to enjoy things, but I think if you recommend a network show to someone, they're going to give you an eye roll. At least
Yeah.
that's from my experience.
Yeah, I would agree. I think something that is important about it is like people we use guilty pleasure so quickly. We're so quick to say, "Oh, I mean, it's a guilty pleasure of mine." And it's always something that you are sort of like you're sort of preempting that eye roll, I think, by saying that.
Hmm.
But we also forget that like guilt comes from shame. And so you're telling someone you should be ashamed of
Yeah.
watching this. And the only way to sort of get away with saying that you enjoy it is to say, well, I'm really ashamed of it, but this is my guilty pleasure. Um, and I think tying shame to enjoyment is such a dangerous thing that we've done because like you said, like, you wanna come home and you've had a hard day and things suck, and all you wanna do is sit down and watch TV. And even in Abbott Elementary, I think is a great example because even with the critical acclaim, people are still like, I mean, it's a sitcom like, it's a sitcom on ABC. Yeah, but it's
Why is
fun.
that
It's
a
just
bad
being like
thing? Yeah.
Yeah,
I think shame, you're so right. It is like that's exactly what a guilty pleasure is. You're like preempting someone to be like, don't judge me for this thing that I secretly think I like. And you're like, but then you're like, should I not like it because
mm,
they're gonna shame me for it? And y- it's also arbitrary, right? Like
yeah,
like why do people care? Why is it someone
yeah.
else's opinion of what I can enjoy? That's the whole point of 525 television shows is there's something for everyone. Like,
Literally,
it's like
there
how, there's somebody's watching epics,
Yeah,
somebody is enjoying those shows, and there wouldn't be this many shows if people didn't enjoy different things. And I think it's
mhm,
like it's that, so much difference in the society we live in. I won't say stems from television because that's not true, but like, I think comes from the sense of shame and in some
yeah,
capacities. And I think there's just like what it just shouldn't be anyone else's decision to say what is right to like and
yeah.
what to enjoy.
Do you think, because I think you slightly touched on this, but I think it's interesting, you almost implied that people deciding that something is prestige makes it harder for you to enjoy because there is this level of, like,
Yeah.
this is better than, and that seems to put you on the defensive instantly.
It's really yes, and I've had moments, and this sounds obnoxious, but whatever. Like, I remember when Fleabag first came out, and,
Mhm.
like, I'm fairly, like, up with knowing when TV's gonna come out. So, like, I will
Yeah.
watch something immediately.
Yeah.
Fleabag comes out, and I was like, "Holy moly, this is really good." And I was like, "Watch Fleabag, watch Fleabag, watch Fleabag." And nobody listened to me. Nobody listened to me. And then all of a sudden, 6 months later, it's the talk of the town, and I'm like, "The hell is going on here?" Like, I said
Yeah.
this before and you ignored me. And like with Ted Lasso, like I was like, "This is something. This is
Yeah.
good. This is fun. This is enjoyable." And people were like, "I don't know. I don't know." And I was like, and then but once it became like a thing, then everyone's like, "Have you heard of this show that like that's a," and I get really annoyed when that because I'm like, you are just liking it because someone told like someone in the internet told you that it was
Yeah.
good. And sometimes I'm like, do people actually like some of these things? And this is when I go back to Severance. And I don't want to like diss Severance because I think that there probably are people who like it. But when I would tell like when people are like, "Oh my God, I just watched Severance. It's the best thing I've ever seen." And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I understand why you may enjoy it, but the best thing you've ever seen? Like, that's such a large statement. I can't pick one thing that I would say that about in television space. And it's such an interesting choice to say that kind of thing. And even like Squid Game. Okay, I get the point. I literally only watched it because everyone's like, "You have to see Squid Game. This is so good. It's amazing." And I was like, "You love this? This is so sad. I'm so upset. I have to watch it in daylight." Like I I can't, I don't get I get the point, but I don't get why it's like this is the thing everyone needs to see and it's like who's deciding that? Who's and so then I get this weird feeling of like whoever's dictating that this is the thing, I do automatically feel skeptical about that thing. Cause now I'm like, I feel like I don't get to discern my own opinion because
Mm.
the internet is now like, this is the thing. If you're going to watch one show, you better watch this one. And it's like, I feel icky because now I'm like, why are you telling me what the best show is? I watch a bajillion of other shows and I enjoy a lot of them and none of them are on your critical acclaimed best show list. And I just so yes, it does make me I become skeptical. That's like how I feel. And my friend who's a network TV writer, she's like gone out for writing jobs and she's now become like frustrated with hacks because she's like not that she was like going out for hacks, but I think she's getting the sense that because she's written on like network sitcoms,
Mm.
she's treated as a writer as a lesser than writer than a hacks writer. And it's like I
Right.
don't know who's dictating those things, but like if she can write a good story, like I guess I don't I think there's that element of this prestige thing. It's like, isn't at this point everything but network TV prestige TV? Like, what are we
Mm.
qualifying? Because a lot of people are like the morning show season 2 was really bad. And it's like, okay, maybe, but like you're still qualifying. Like, is prestige prestige if it's not good?
Mm. That's a good question. I no, I think, there's something funny about the way you were saying, like, as you tried to figure out who it is that's saying it, it comes
Yeah.
down to, like, the internet. The
Yeah.
internet told you
Yeah.
that this is yeah, but our generation, I would say something that's interesting about that is that there is, like I would say so much of TV that I watched that was formative came from recommendations from the internet, like, early
Mm,
Tumblr, and I think that was before networks or streaming was paying I mean, streaming was very young at that point as well, but, before anyone was really paying attention to what the internet had to say,
mhm,
the internet was an amazing recommendation device of the only reason why I found shows like Doctor Who or Merlin or things that weren't, in the sort of easy to find, like, time slots that you would watch something, and I think now it's sort of become this idea of, "Oh, we're greenlighting movies based off of the internet response." So I saw an article recently, and I'll say this because someone else said it, where they said The Gray Man is a perfect example of what happens when you allow algorithms to greenlight movies.
mhm.
Um, and as someone who I had fun watching The Gray Man, right?
Yeah,
It
same.
is out of control.
Yeah, but I don't need more.
Right. I know. Yeah, exactly. I enjoyed myself.
Yeah.
I am done enjoying myself.
Mhm.
But I think it is interesting that, like, I don't know if that was your experience, but I do think the internet massively helped me decide what I watch and what my taste is. And now do also agree in the same way. It's become this sort of echo chamber of, like, this is what's good and this is what's bad, and this is you can see sort of the power of the internet, like Our Flag Means Death getting renewed and the massive campaign that came behind that.
Yeah,
You
and
can
as
see
someone
sort
who
of
find
yeah,
that I don't even and I'm sitting here and the internet loves that show.
yeah,
And I've
yeah.
watched most of it and I'm like, I don't know why, but I'm not clicking with this. This
Mm,
is not clicking for me. Like, and that's a good example because I'm like, I will watch the whole season, but I
mhm,
still will feel like I don't get it. But like, that's
mhm.
okay. I don't have to
Yeah.
get it. But it is interesting that like I've gotten to this place where because I watch so much TV and I like really like try to be ahead of it with like my 100 schedules that I keep track of, like when shows are coming out. If I'm not interested based on the idea and maybe trailer or like who's in it or whatever, I won't watch it. And people are like,
Mm,
wait, why aren't you watching that? And I'm like, because I don't want to. And that concept is so odd for people because
yeah.
you're like, oh, this is the show everyone's talking about, so you have to watch it. And I'm like, what? What does that mean? Just because someone on the internet, and I read a lot of like publications, but I found the journalists that I like, whose opinions I like, and I will look to them to see what
Mm,
they're saying. But it's also so clogged these days with the campaigns, like you're saying, with buying whatever. Like, it's also not clean. In the past, shows would just be shows, whatever, but now it's all, paid for in certain ways that feel weird. And so to me, I'm like, I just don't I want to be able to come to my own conclusions or opinions before, during, and after watching shows. And it feels like it's become this tough thing. And but even you saying you got your recommendations on Tumblr. Tumblr is a very specific type of place, and that is like Doctor Who and Merlin. Like you may not get that recommendation on Vulture or
right.
on Uprocks or whatever. You're going to get it on Tumblr from someone who had like that is so specific. And I think the internet these days is like let us tell you what's best in a mainstream way. But it's like, why does mainstream mean best in that
Mm.
capacity? And then, I've known people who, when I'm recommending shows, I will say, like, what platforms do you have? Because I don't want to recommend something if someone can't watch it. And then people are like, should I be, like, someone's like, should I be watching The Boys? Like, am I missing? Because they felt really weird for missing what was happening. And I was like, you don't like gore and you don't like superheroes. I understand you feel like you're missing something. You will not enjoy it. I like fundamentally, you shouldn't watch a
Mm.
show just because people are talking about it because you feel like you're missing out if you're going to hate it.
No,
Like,
it's created sort of this, like, FOMO idea of television, and so you almost are watching stuff that it doesn't matter. Like you said, there's not good and bad, there's just sort of not for you, um, and you're watching something that's just not for you, and that's like, there does seem to be this sort of list of shows everyone should be watching, even if it doesn't appeal to you in any way, shape, or form.
and like, who's to say what that means? But you're so right. There is like this like known list
Yeah.
that people are like, well, you better be watching that. And it's like, but who on the like is the government behind like manipulating the television? Like, I literally don't understand whose decision it is to say this is the show you should be watching,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Do you feel like that happening keeps people from enjoying TV in the same way that you've been able to do so?
I think so. And this is why I make it very clear. I'm like, please let me like someone posted, like a friend of mine posted on Instagram last week. They were like, okay, what show should I watch? Severance or The Bear? And I know this person and I was like, can I give you different options?
Yeah.
I'm not saying you shouldn't watch those at some point, but I know you and I know that those wouldn't be the shows you would like enjoy. And so I gave her this list of like other shows and I was like and like very clear and I was like here's what it is. Here's where it is. Here's what it's about. And she was like, "Okay, Yellow Jackets sounds way more up my alley." And she like loves it. I'm like, "Great." Like that gives me a warm gooey feeling of like why should she watch Severance if she won't enjoy it just because the internet's telling her this is the show to watch?
Yeah.
It just feels like I mean, Yellow Jackets is also acclaimed and good, and like I like that's part of the cultural zeitgeist, if you will. But like, why should she watch those other shows first just because she thinks she should? And I feel like we live in a time where there's that secret list of like, okay, Squid Game and Severance and Hacks and The White Lotus and like all these other things that are like, and I've watched all those things and I've enjoyed them at different levels, but like it's not fair to dictate to society what you should enjoy. And I think that is why a lot of people feel like the Chicago shows on NBC may feel guilty pleasures. Like I thought La Brea was insane. I don't know if you know. Do you know
I
what La
don't
Brea
know,
is? Have you heard
no.
of this? It was this new NBC show this year that was basically like the La Brea tar pits, like by that in LA, this area of LA, where basically the ground opened up to a sinkhole and people ended up in like prehistoric, like a different
What?
time. Yeah, and it's so bananas town, and it's like I would joke with people like, oh, if that's where you work, you would have been La Brea. Like it's just
Yeah.
fun to like. It's so goofy and they're all taking it so seriously, like the characters on the show because they're like in this different time.
Well, of course.
And it's a blast. It's truly a blast because it's nonsense. And sometimes I just want to enjoy nonsense, and I love nonsense. And like, why should it be treated like? I feel like people are like, oh, you watch La Brea? It's like, who cares? I'm enjoying. Like, it's not taking away from me watching Squid Game. I can watch that too, but like. Squid Game scares me. So after Squid Game, I want to go freaking watch La Brea, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's this element of, like, the shows that seem to make it through are sort of it's interesting that you brought up The Bear because I am watching The Bear right now, but I watch an episode I've only watched 2 episodes. Like, I think it's really well done, and I think what I thought was really great about it, was that the first episode I went in knowing nothing. I watched it because be shameless in saying that my, reason is because I watched all 11 seasons of Shameless, and I think Jeremy Allen White's amazing, and such a good actor, and I was excited to see him be a lead in something, and so I had no idea what it was about, and I watched the first episode, and as I was watching the first episode, I was so stressed. It is such a stressful experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny you say that because I had the exact same experience.
Yeah.
I watched the first episode because I was like, love Shameless, love Jeremy Allen White. Let's do this thing. I hate cooking things. I hate everything related to cooking. I do not enjoy cooking shows. I hate watching cooking. The fact that the entirety of the episode took place in a stressful kitchen, I was like, I will actively not watch this show
Mm,
because I was so anxious for the entire time. I was like, why would I watch this show it's not fun anxiety.
mm.
It's not like fun anxiety. It was stressful. I hate food. Do not show this to me anxiety.
Yeah.
So I hear
Yeah, yeah, well, I thought what was really cool about it was I felt so stressed and I felt so anxious watching it, and I couldn't figure out why, and then I realized that it's a show about someone who's grieving, and I am grieving, and
mm,
so watching that, I felt like, "Okay, this actually" what's interesting about it is a show for me. It is a show that is experiencing something very specific to where I'm at. It's something that speaks to me, and it's something that actually does give me that very deeply connected feeling. However, I have watched 2 episodes of it because of that. Like, it is
mm.
so much. Like, I think I watched episode 2, like, in the middle of the day, like, on my I was taking lunch and I watched it. Um and maybe a couple hours later, I just started crying, and I was like, now I've connected it. It's because I've watched this show that kind of scratches something deep about me
Mm.
right now, and it's making me feel this way, and I think there's something very powerful in that, but I also need to then go watch 6 hours of Love Island. Like, I
Yes.
I need and I
Yeah.
think there's a balance to that. Like, you can love prestige TV, and you can watch these things that that scratch that and make you feel good, but there's also this pressure to watch it instantly, like, all of those episodes are out and everyone's talking about everything, and you have to dodge sort of spoilers and
Yeah.
be able to talk about it when, like, I think sometimes TV needs I need a week in between the episodes.
Well, you're talking to the person who genuinely prefers weekly viewing. I
Yeah.
actually like feel and I know that like some Netflix shows, you know, like Stranger Things and like other shows, I'm like, okay, I want to keep going. And they do. And I feel like Netflix has made that, you know, that brand.
Yeah.
But a lot of other shows, I'm like, I don't I love I love the marinating. I love to marinate
Mhm.
with with the episode and just like be like, what do I think?
Yeah.
Like, and I do love reading articles about, especially like interesting television shows. I'm like, what's gonna happen? What does this mean? What do they think? Like, I love discerning these things. Like even like White Lotus, which I think was like I enjoyed White Lotus. I didn't like have the same like love affair that so many people did with it. But the skepticism of like, oh, like I'll say like Mare of Easttown, I really loved Mare of Easttown. And the in between weeks, I would read probably 20 articles every week just dedicated to like what people thought, who was the killer, what's going on. Like I just really like I love like engrossing myself in that stuff. And I think there's stuff to be said about that. Whereas like streaming, yeah, it's really hard because you're like, how do I avoid spoiling these things? And how can like part of this time is engaging with the internet that people telling us to do something. But you're like, I can't engage with the internet until I've watched it all because the internet's telling I don't want to know
Right.
what the internet's gonna tell me.
Right. Yeah, it's do you feel like there's a way to watch TV in a so I wanna say I wanna use the word pure, and I don't even know that that's right, but, like, in
Mm.
a way that isn't influenced, that you can actually sit down
Oof.
and watch a show and decide how you feel about it without influence anymore?
The the only way for me personally is if I've gotten there first.
Mm,
And truly for me, Fleabag and Ted Lasso were two good examples that became like sensations, right? Like they became these big things. And I watched the entirety of those shows. Ted Lasso was weekly. I feel like it didn't become a thing until at least probably week 5 or 6, if even then. Because I remember I would tell coworkers and they'd be like, I watched an episode and I didn't like it. And I'm like, okay. And then 3 months later, they're like, I watched it all. I'm like, "Oh, okay," because they felt like they should at that time,
right.
right? And I think I watched like Vanessa Bayer has this show that I don't know if you watched it. It was called I Love That for You.
Oh, I have not.
And it came
Okay.
out in a quiet show. It's a sitcom on Showtime, which a lot of people don't have. And they don't do a lot of comedy. And I thought it was like such a fun, it was weekly. I had a blast. I felt so not influenced by anyone because no one was talking about it. And like it was just such a fun experience getting to enjoy a show with myself, you know? And that is really hard to do these days. And maybe that is why I sometimes enjoy network television because I'm like, no one's talking about that. So I'm having a blast on my own. Like, I don't need you to comment on it, right? Like, everyone's like, then you feel weird because you're like, okay, everyone's obsessed with. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to bash on Severance, but like, I just feel like there was a week where every single day someone was like, oh my God, I just watched Severance. It's the best thing I've ever seen. And I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah. And it's hard for me because I'm like, what does that say, right? Because you're like, oh God, I don't love this thing that everyone's talking about loving. Like, what's wrong with me? But that's wrong. Like, who's decided? But then it's weird. It's like, do they actually really love it? Or are they saying that they love it because of this whole
Yeah, this pressure,
spiral?
this echo chamber of, like, these are the 5 shows. Um, and
Right.
it's, yeah, I do think there's a level of just the pressure to say, "This is what's good, and this is what's good, and this is what no one's talking about." There's almost not like, the stuff that people are eye rolling about aren't like, I haven't even heard of La Brea. I will be watching it. That sounds like an amazing romp, and I can't wait. But there's not like I mean, I'm sure there are some, but there's not articles all over the place being like, "Look at how dumb this show was." Um, it's just
Yeah.
no one's talking about it.
No, but I mean, I think that's why I think Abbott Elementary is so fascinating as like an example of
Mhm.
this because it's an ABC show, right? And I will say I'm the only one of people I know who has cable. Like I pay for my own cable because I love regular television. I love just having TV on because I'm an old lady apparently. But I think a lot of people like there are so many of these like I think Grand Crew is a great example of like a 20s early 30s sitcom. Like the characters are all in their 30s, but it's like it's in line like it's with other sitcoms that people have enjoyed in our age group. And I'm like, "Ooh," and it's all on Hulu, I think, or Peacock or so. Like it's all on the internet. People can access it. And I'm like, but no one knows it exists, right? And it's like not cool because it's on NBC, but it's like people our age will enjoy this show. It's very funny. And but because like I can guarantee that a bunch of people didn't watch Abbott Elementary when they heard it was on ABC, but when the internet was like, this is actually good, they went to Hulu and were like, I will watch it now.
The thing about it is Abbott Elementary is a show for me. Like, it is exactly up my alley. I love it. I think it's so funny. I don't watch ABC. I don't have cable. I mean, I do watch The Bachelor, but
And that's there has to be a world where there's a way to target like it's on Hulu. You can watch it. You watch it on Hulu and it's like why are people not pushing for Grand Crew or Welcome to Flatch to be watched by people in their 20s and 30s because it is show those are shows for people in our like more so than people who naturally watch network TV. Why are we not doing a marketing push to be like here, Hulu, put this on your main page to be like, or if you like this show, if you like Friends, watch Grand Crew. If you like, these shows, Grand Crew would be up your alley. Like the guy wrote on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. If you liked Parks and Rec, The Office, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, any of those shows, you will enjoy this because how could you not? And it's interesting that people look down on things because of their home base, right? And again, I think like Abbott Elementary is so interesting because like, would if you hadn't heard the internet raving about it, would you have ever found it?
No, I don't think I would have. That's the thing is, like, I I don't know, I think it's so funny because it's like, I love the cast. I love the I love a mockumentary. I love something that, feels different and funny, and just the characters are really sharp. I think the humor is really sharp. It's very specifically catered to me, but because it is on ABC, I would never have gotten to the point that I was like, "Oh, I should try this," or I wouldn't have necessarily heard about it unless it had gotten that sort of internet acclaim, and then I sat down and I watched it, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, this is great," but it is that space of, like the other thing I think is interesting with that example specifically is that, Quinta got all of these comments that were like, you need to do an episode about school shooters," and she's like, "That's not no, first of all. Second of all, that's not what this show is. It's not my job to do that. I'm making a wonderful, joyous show about a school in Philadelphia and having fun with it. And that's what that show is. It's not about that. Like, and I think what's interesting about it is those conversations, those comments are only coming because it is in this sort of like space of these are the shows that you should be watching and these are the tastemakers and these are the people that matter. And when I saw those comments, I was like, "Do you watch the show?" Because that is not the
Yeah.
show and it shouldn't be her responsibility to do that. It's not it's just not that. And people are like, if you did this episode, you could really change the laws. Like inspire our congress people to do something about this. And it's like, well,
Okay.
I I don't know about that.
Yeah, but like, yeah, no one's telling the neighborhood they have to go do that, and it's like, it's just fun. It's just funny. It makes me laugh, and it's not a funny subject, but you're exactly right. It's because it's like hit this nerve of like top 5 shows you should be watching right now. That is why it's being even talked about in that way. And that's like you say you like mockumentary style things, and it's like Welcome to Flash is mockumentary, and like but you've never heard of it, right? Like that's and it's like, and I'm like, please, people, go watch this show. It is mockumentary. It is funny. It's absurd. And it's like, I wish there was a way for people to like, I don't know. I wish people could just like have the capacity to like, and I don't mean that people don't. I wish the world had the capacity to like give people what they want, like what's best for them without the judgment of like, and that's when I think that the purity question of like, how do you purely watch a show? Like I watched Under the Banner of Heaven, which I found to be like not spoken about. I didn't see any articles about it. And I was like, I'm going to watch this. And I would call it prestige, but I enjoyed the fact that no one was talking about it. And, like I liked that element. I was like, this is mine,
Mm,
you know?
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, to bring it back to Clue.
Yes. Sorry. Tangent of television.
No, I think this is a great, point, and I think one of the reasons that, it made me think to, bring it back to where we started is I think Clue sounds like that was the experience that you had as well.
Mm.
Sort of, I was watching TV, it came on, it is something for me, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and then I had to seek it out again. I'm curious about kind of do you feel like maybe that influenced the way that you seek out media now?
I do. I do think that. I think it's like I yeah, I just want to enjoy things. Like again, like there are all these like Peacock has a lot of these like random British 6-episode shows. No one would even know that they existed in America unless you're like, I'm on Peacock and I'm going to watch this. And I saw a trailer for one and I was like, that's interesting. I'm going to go watch it. And it was 6 episodes and I enjoyed myself. And it was like it doesn't even matter. Like, I don't need to go telling people this, go watch this show. It was like, I enjoyed it for me. I enjoyed those 6 hours of my life and it like kept me entertained, but like no one's ever going to know that that show existed here. Right. And it's like, that's bizarre, but I kind of like it. And I do think I seek out and I watch a lot of trailers of TV, like as soon as they come out and I read a lot of stuff. So I like to know what's coming. And and again, it's like that feeling of if I don't immediately click with wanting to watch it, I'm not going to watch it because it's just like, why would I put myself through that? But I really love finding things. And for, like as a storyteller, I guess I'll call myself, like, I really seek out, and like my friends and I have been like writing together, and I want to, and like we talk about this a lot, like we want to write stuff
Mm,
that we would want to see. And I think there's something
yeah.
to be like enjoy. And like I want to write stuff that I would enjoy. And I think it's like I look at people who are like, I'm writing this thing to fit
Yeah.
this thing. But it's like I just want to enjoy like all I want to do is have a good time. Like there was like when I see movies, I don't necessarily need to watch like the best critically acclaimed Oscar buzzworthy drama.
Yeah.
I just want to have a good time. I just like want to. I loved that movie Eurovision a few years ago. I don't know if like I could watch that a lot. Like, yeah, like it's not one of my favorite movies, but that was a blast, right? Like I just want to have a blast when I'm consuming content. I just want to be enjoying myself. Like I read a lot of rom-com books, and I think that's truly looked down on. And I'm like, who cares? Like I'm enjoying my time, like reading. Like why should we have to live in a world where you're like watching something because you feel like you
Yeah.
have to?
It shouldn't feel like a chore.
I think a lot of people who only really watch one to four shows at a time, and that's pushing it, watch things because they think that that's what they're supposed to be watching. When I'm like, oh, there's something for you out there that I bet you would really enjoy.
But I do like sort of this idea that you've posed, which is seeking out things that you enjoy rather than things you're supposed to watch. Um, and I really love that. I think that's something to keep sort of in mind.
And I think Clue, yeah, like Clue fits that for me. Clue is like, and I don't even care if it's good or not. Like, I don't even know. I've never looked up to see because it doesn't matter to me. I know I enjoy it and it fills my joy box. And like, I don't think Galaxy Quest was critically acclaimed, but I remember seeing it a few years ago at like some place downtown LA. And there were so many people there. And it was so fun to see that movie with fans, right? Like, what a treat. Like, I would love to do that with Clue again. Like, just see it with knowing that there's a community of people who enjoy things. Like, I
Yeah.
love enjoying things. Simple as that sounds.
Yeah, it's just nice to enjoy yourself for once.
Yeah.
I think that's I oh yeah, I think that's really strong, and I think I love that Clue is the thing that brought that to you. So, I think I am going to ask you our final question that I ask everyone, which is if you had never seen Clue, what would be different about you as a person today?
Ooh, gosh. I think like it really, I think, helped discern my taste in comedy and camp. Like I think it really like it's hard to know the spiral effect of like would I have gone down a path of like enjoying these things? Like I probably still would have enjoyed some other things I watched, but I think like in terms of loving, like I read a lot of Agatha Christie. I love murder mysteries, and I actually do feel like Clue for me was sort of the who done it, the like guessing game of like the enjoyment of figuring that out and watching it play out, I do think really spawned from Clue. So I do wonder like where I would have landed without those things. And I think, my friend, as I said, we're like writing these things and her favorite movie is Die Hard. My favorite movie is Clue. And we wrote an action comedy where like, and as like for writing purposes, it's like we felt very influenced by our favorite movies in writing this action comedy because it's like we took elements from these pieces of movie and entertainment that we felt so enamored by. And for me, it's like, and we said like we want to write a murder mystery, and it's like that all comes from Clue. So to me, like as a storyteller, just as a person, I feel completely influenced by Clue, and I do wonder like would I care about these things or feel so connected? I feel very connected to the elements, and I feel like would I feel this connection if I didn't have this specific tether?
Well, I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing and hanging out with me today.
Thank you.
And I hope you continue to enjoy rather than uh, watch required watching.
Thank you. I hope the same for you.
All right. We will be back next week. Thank you guys for joining me. If you'd like to hang out with me between now and then, or just let me know what you thought about this episode, you can find me on all social media at Marissa Kamari. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, which I release an issue of every week with this podcast by visiting our website, tandonproductions.com. Until next Wednesday, I hope you are enjoying what you love.